On the 1st of June 2015, Katherine Chappel visited Lion Park, an animal preserve just outside Johannesburg in South Africa. The 29-year-old was an award-winning visual effects editor who had worked on many high-profile projects, including the fantasy television series Game of Thrones. On this trip, however, she was engaging in her other passion, wildlife preservation. She was visiting South Africa for 2 weeks to volunteer on a wildlife protection mission and to raise funds for a charity that combats poaching. While there, she was also investigating the possibility of making her own film about the damage caused by poaching. Lion Park was a large and popular wildlife park where visitors were almost guaranteed to get close-up views of animals including giraffes, zebras, ostriches, cheetahs, jackals, and, of course, lions. At Lion Park, these animals were kept in large enclosures that resembled their natural habitats. Visitors, inside their own vehicles, were allowed to drive into these enclosures and pass among the animals at slow speeds to observe them at close hand. There were many safety precautions in place, including rules about keeping windows closed and never exiting a vehicle. Numerous signs placed throughout the park reminded visitors of these rules. Katherine was accompanied on her trip to Lion Park by her guide, 66-year-old Pierre Potgieter, an experienced South African guide who ran the company Calabash Tours in cooperation with his wife. Pierre was driving and Katherine was riding in the passenger seat of a white SUV. They travelled slowly through several enclosures before reaching the lion enclosure, where they received a verbal warning about keeping windows closed and were also handed a piece of paper upon which the same advice was printed. Duly, they wound up their windows and proceeded into the enclosure. A short way into the enclosure, they came within just a few meters of a small group of lions resting in the sun. They paused there briefly, and Katherine wound down her window to take a picture of the animals. The occupants of the cars behind them honked their horns in warning as a single lioness rose to her feet from the group and slowly approached the white SUV. She reared up and placed her paws on the side of the car, remaining there for about 15 seconds. Then, without further warning, the lioness lunged in through the open window and seized Katherine in her powerful jaws. The attack happened too quickly for Katherine to react and resulted in instant, very serious injuries. Pierre leaned across from the driver's seat and punched the lioness repeatedly to try and drive her away. He suffered bites and scratches. The lioness initially retreated, but then almost immediately returned to continue her attack on Katherine. Lion Park staff rushed to the scene and chased away the lioness, as well as the other nearby lions. They called an ambulance that arrived within 10 minutes, but by the time it did, Katherine Chappel had passed away from her injuries. Her guide, Pierre Potgieter, sustained bites and scratches that were treated in hospital without complication. He was kept in for further treatment, however, as he had also suffered a minor heart attack during the encounter. The experience left him unable to continue his work as a guide, and with a lifelong aversion to the sight of blood. Police carried out an investigation in the aftermath of the accident. Particular concerns were raised given that a similar attack had taken place just months before, when an Australian tourist had opened the window of their vehicle whilst inside the lion enclosure and sustained a serious bite to their leg. However, once the investigation concluded, no action was taken against the park. It was noted that the park had taken sufficient steps to inform visitors of the importance of closing the windows of their vehicles. Indeed, the slip of paper bearing the printed reminder to keep windows closed was found on the floor of the white SUV after the attack. The lioness that carried out the attack was isolated, but was not put down, as it was understood she had acted naturally given the circumstances. Katherine is remembered for the talent she displayed at work and her passion for the causes important to her. She had lived a life of adventure that spanned multiple continents, a life that was cut short in a swift and brutal manner by a momentary mistake. On the 30th of May, 2025, businessman and philanthropist Bernd Kebbel was on safari. The 59-year-old had always loved animals and had spent many days and a great deal of his own money supporting lions in particular. For years, he had made mostly anonymous donations to animal conservation trusts and supported them directly by providing equipment and organizing events. Indeed, Bernd Kebbel had done so much to support Namibia's Desert Lion Conservation Trust over the years that the organization named one of the lions it observed as part of its work Kebbel, in honor of him. Bernd embarked on the 2025 trip with his wife Connie and several close friends. They travelled out together into the wilderness of northwestern Namibia to wild camp alongside the Hoanib River. They would sleep in tents mounted on the roofs of their vehicles and accessed via ladders. As a group, they were well versed in wilderness safety, having been on many such trips before. Around 4 miles from a luxury campsite, the group parked their vehicles in a U-shaped formation and set up camp. They ate dinner together, and then, as the sun set, retreated to their tents to sleep. Around 1:30 a.m., Bernd awoke and announced to his wife that he was going to step outside the tent to use the toilet. As he descended the ladder, however, he was savagely attacked by a lioness that had been lying in wait. This lioness was named Charlie, and was in fact one of the animals that had been fitted with a satellite collar and monitored by the Desert Lion Conservation Trust, the same non-profit that Bernd had supported for so much of his life. Charlie seized Bernd's head in her jaws and dragged him from the ladder. Bernd's wife Connie left the tent and tried to drive the lioness off with her bare hands, pulling on the satellite collar in an attempt to halt the attack. Wakened by the sounds of screaming and snarling, others from the camp left their tents. One struck the lioness with a torch. Eventually, the lioness released Bernd and retreated. Bernd was very seriously injured. The group carried him to one of the vehicles and left the scene, driving at top speed to the nearby campsite, from which they were able to call for emergency assistance. However, by the time Bernd was seen by a medical professional, he had succumbed to his injuries. This attack was considered extremely unusual. In its aftermath, the Desert Lion Conservation Trust noted what might have been some contributing factors. It was observed that in the years following the 2020 coronavirus pandemic, the conduct of tour guides carrying out tourist safaris in the area had changed. Guides were seen driving their vehicles much closer to groups of lions than they ever had previously. Lions were unlikely to attack anything as large as a vehicle, but the close proximity meant that they became used to being around vehicles and lost any natural sense of fear or respect for them. The trust had complained to several tour operators about this behavior, but had not seen it change, despite guides being retrained. The frequent close proximity of tourist vehicles had also often interfered with the hunting activity of lions, causing them to catch less prey than they otherwise would. This had combined with weather conditions that made prey more scarce than usual to result in a situation where many lions, Charlie included, were not feeding as often as they normally would. Charlie, specifically, was observed to be particularly lean in the weeks before the attack, and may have been unusually hungry. For these reasons, Charlie was willing to move closer to the campsite than she otherwise might have, and was quite willing to opportunistically prey on a human when the chance to do so arose. The day after the fatal attack on Bernd, Charlie attacked another group, slashing their tents but causing no further harm. It appeared, however, that she was now willing to target humans in her search for food. The reluctant decision was made to put her down, and she was shot by rangers a few days later. Bernd had dedicated much of his life to the preservation of lions. He died when attacked by one of the very creatures he had sought to protect, a lioness driven to extremes by circumstances that Bernd, more than anyone, had been fighting to address.